Hi, I'm Bella. I'm 17 years old and I live in a small coastal community called Darrell. I love the ocean. I've spent endless days out on the water fishing and diving from it. And I'm lucky enough to eat freshly caught fish for dinner on a regular basis. I know most families don't have this opportunity like I do. So I asked myself the question, where are these families getting their fish from? How is it caught? What are the processes around this? And is it sustainable? With these questions in mind, I've set myself the task of finding out just how sustainable New Zealand's fisheries really are. I began my investigation by finding out how New Zealand's fisheries are run and the systems in place. New Zealand's fisheries are run by the quota management system. At the start of every year, a total allowable catch is decided on through research of New Zealand's fish stocks. This is then broken down into a total allowable commercial catch, which is further broken down into individual transferable quota. This is where individuals and commercial companies can buy their own share of the quota, which allows them to catch and sell a certain amount of fish. The remaining of New Zealand's total allowable catch is then set aside for recreational fishing. This is where catch limits are put in place. To sell fish, you must be a licensed fish receiver. This requires filling out forms and keeping track of how much fish you've caught, where it's going, and how you're selling it. Living in a coastal community should mean that locals have access to freshly caught fish, right? I went to talk to locals to see where they bought their fish from and what their outlook was on how they buy their fish and how sustainable it is. 30% of people I surveyed replied that they buy their fish weekly. When asked how much this cost them, on average it costs about $30 per kg, with some people having to pay up to $80 a kg for fish, with snapper generally costing $45 to $50 for a kg. Just under 50% of people that were surveyed reported not knowing how their fish that they were buying was caught. Majority of the people surveyed that knew where their fish was coming from reported that they knew that it was caught by commercial netting or trawling. There was a small amount of people that also said that their fish was farmed, such as salmon. Minority of people who said that they knew how their fish was caught reported that it was caught with sustainable methods, such as small, long lining or hand reeled in fish from local businesses. Almost 95% of people said that as a local of a coastal community, they should have easy access to sustainably caught fresh fish. And 50% of these people reported to already have access to freshly caught fish. 77% of people said that they'd be willing to pay more for fish if they knew it had been caught locally and sustainably. Majority of people said they'd be willing to pay 10% to $20 more than what the fish is already sold for if they knew that it was local and sustainably caught. Almost every person surveyed said that they would like to be able to buy their fish straight off the wharf in their local coastal community and cut out the processes in the middle where fish has to be shipped to and from. Currently, large commercial fishing companies are dominating the quota, with 78% of the quota owned by just 10 companies. I went straight to the source and went to interview some commercial fishermen to ask them how they catch their fish, who they sell it to, and their outlook on New Zealand's fisheries.
I'm Peter Longdill. I'm General Manager Sustainability at Sanford. Sanford is a company. We operate in both the wild catch sector. We also operate in the aquaculture space. We're what you would call a vertically integrated seafood company. So not only do we have the on-water activity, but then we have processing facilities on land, and then a network where we sell that material, the seafood to our customers.
My name's Carl Muir, and I'm from the Artisan Fishing company in Tairua. For the last 18 years, I've been taking people fishing, running fishing charters out of Tairua, and this year, after hearing lots of local restaurants for many years have been unable to buy fresh fish in Tairua, and lots of locals have been unable to buy fresh fish, I decided to start up my own small-scale commercial fishing operation.
We use bottom trawling, a number of vessels that do that. We have a couple of long liner vessels. The vessels that we own ourselves, the long liners are deep water fishery vessels. And the specific number of hooks on them, I wouldn't be able to tell you actually. It will be substantial, right? They're what we call auto long liners. So they're not, like a long liner where you've got a guy hooking stuff on. It's all automated. It will be in the multiple thousands of hooks per shot, that's for sure.
So all our fish are caught pretty much using the same techniques a recreational fisherman would use. So we use rod and reel, and we also use small long lines. They're only left out for 15 to 20 minutes, and they typically at the moment they've only got 25 hooks on them.
We're rolling precision harvesting device out throughout our fleet more and more rapidly. You know, we're keen to do that where there is benefit to do so, either for the fish stocks and or for the quality of product that it provides. We do not plan at the moment to phase out or stop bottom trawling. We do not go out, or we do not target, and we do not go and fish in areas where there's rocky reef and all these sort of areas where you might expect, you know, these coral forests. We're not actively aiming to fish in those areas. The reason is it's not only terribly bad for the environment if you are trawling through a coral forest, but it's really bad for your gear as well. But the guys even on our boats, right, they're guys that have, you know, they've got into the industry because they love the sea. They have the health of the oceans close to their heart. All of our trawling is essentially occurring over what we would describe as relatively flat, plain, featureless bottom. We have observers on board all the boats who have to report everything that comes up in the net, including any, if there are any corals that do come up, they all get reported. And I'm not saying there can't be improvements to bottom trawling method, right? If we can find a way to have an equally efficient method of fishing while not contacting the bottom, then we'll certainly work towards that. But we also need a method of harvesting that fish which results in a reasonably priced product at the end of it. If we were to forego bottom trawling altogether, I think we would have a resource there, not only a food resource for the country, but an economic resource for the country, which we would not be able to utilise for the benefit of the people of New Zealand, right, in terms of jobs and economic production. And it's not, you know, it's not just a financial decision, right? The impacts are not huge relative to those the sort of returns. Yes, and the reason I say that, I guess when you look at sustainability, there's a range of aspects to it, right? There's environmental sustainability, there's economic sustainability, and there's social sustainability in terms of, you know, the effect on people and the likes as well. Those methods, right, and in the framework that the government used to evaluate, and others, not just our government, but other governments and international organisations to evaluate the sustainability of a fishery, they include fishing methods, right? Where there are adverse effects from a fishing method which are not acceptable, then that fishing method becomes, you know, essentially banned or outlawed, right? Dynamite fishing, for example, you know, extreme examples, but those are methods which are not acceptable, and they are either banned or illegal in our context because they have too much adverse impact. We actively work also to reduce the, you know, any adverse impacts from the fishing methods that we do use, to reduce those even further.
I believe we're catching our fish far more sustainably than most of the other companies in New Zealand, especially the big companies.
If we take the example of a long liner, deep water fisheries, the hook will come up. If there's a fish on it, great. On the long liners, they get ickied, the spike through the brain to put it out. It's then processed to some degree. Either it'll be gutted, and then the gills taken out and bled, right? And normally the head removed as well. Those pieces on most deep water vessels, those parts of the fish then get processed on board to a product called fish meal or fish oil. The actual fillet and the rest of it, once it's been processed On the deep water vessels, it's actually packed in the final consumer packaging. So if it's a two fish, they're a pretty big fish, they go whole, get packaged in plastic. The other sort of species, let's say it's a hoki, will get processed and the fillets taken and put into the actual final packaging. So a cardboard box lined with plastic, and then plastic to separate the fillets, sealed, and then snap frozen in a blast freezer on board. The boat then returns to port and goes into a cool store. At that time, it's logged into our on-land inventory and ideally sold to a customer relatively quickly. Once there's a sales contract, there's a factory order sent out to our cool store managers. They will collect the product and then move it into normally a refrigerated container. If it's going export, gets shipped into one of those and then loaded onto the boat and sent to the customer. Or if it's domestic, it might be on a truck. No processing that happens in that inshore fishery. The fish is stored on ice and covered in salt ice. The boat returns to port after the end of its journey, after another maybe 1, 2, 3 days. It'll return to port. That the fish are put into fish bins, transported to either refrigerated warehouses at our offload destinations. So it will go into one of those, and then it will either be sold as a whole fish, or it will be processed in one of our on-land sites, and that happens essentially immediately. Within a day or two of it being landed, it's either sold whole to a customer, a wholesale customer, or it's processed and then they're sold to a supermarket. We process it, and then the fillets are couriered out to the supermarkets. That's essentially that process.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Artisan Fishing logo, it very much represents one fish from the ocean to the plate. We believe in small catches with as fewer steps as possible to the plate. So a lot of the fish we catch will be cooked up that same night by locals or the next night, and same with restaurants as well. So say for example kingfish, if we all of the kingfish we've caught so far have been actually lure caught, which is probably a first for commercial fishing in New Zealand. They're in the boat within a couple of minutes. They are ickied and put straight on ice, and they'll be on the plate, on someone's plate that night. Our fish is taken home, it's filleted. We make sure all cuts of the fish are utilised, so we're selling kingfish heads to people to make fish stocks or to roast up. We're selling the wings, we're selling the frame, so we believe in full utilisation of the fish. From there, all the fish is put on social media, on Facebook, out to locals. So we've got locals following our Facebook, and we also put it out on all the local community groups, and all of that fish, the local community gets first dibs on that fish. From there, anything else goes out to local restaurants, and that pretty much uses up most of the catch that we're taking. We do the odd box of fish to direct customers in Auckland, but probably 80 to 90% of our fish is eaten locally in our local town.
It's going to range normally around, say, 30,000 tonnes. It would be an average sort of level.
It would be very rare for us to be holding a lot of frozen fish. Most of our fish is cleared out fresh. Like right now, we've got a little bit of fish frozen down from our last trip that didn't sell, but that will clear out very quick. So we fundamentally believe that there's no point in going fishing while you've still got fish there to sell. At the moment, we've probably got 3 or 4 kgs of frozen fish in our freezer.
Some people might interpret, well, if we are going out fishing in the inshore fishery, most snappers, I guess the big sort of species, and anything else is bycatch, which is certainly not how we look at it. And we actually work with all of our vessels and with a lot of historical knowledge, so that when we actually do ask our boats to go out fishing for us, we give them what's called a catch plan. They're going fishing, and the methods that they're using will harvest a variety of species. So we actually give them that, say, look, that's the plan, and of course we're ready to deal with variances and things, but the reason we do that is to manage the quota allowance for the various species. We don't want to sort of get a surprise that, oh, we caught a whole lot of gurnard that we didn't anticipate. So we actually assign plans with the knowledge of that. That's one way we sort of, I guess, reduce the undesirable or unwanted species. We also actively work with a number of our customers to promote some of those lesser known or lesser valued species, so that there is a market for them. As a whole, you're generally looking around 10% of what's caught is bycatch, where you have to either there is little value in selling it or zero market whatsoever. In some fisheries, you might have a species which you consider bycatch, when in another fishery area, it's actually a very desirable species to have. Now, what happens with that bycatch? It all gets registered in terms of how much is being caught. It can either be processed in the fish meal plant, right, on board for some of the deep water species if the fish are dead already. Sometimes it is returned back to the sea if that's legally allowed, and it's only when it's legally allowed when an observer checks it off. As a general rule, we try to either reduce it in the first instance, plan to avoid it, and then sell it.
At the moment, we've got what is called ACE, so your annual catch entitlement, for about half a dozen species. The majority of fish we catch is within those 6 species, so there is not really any bycatch. There's might be just the odd 1 or 2 fish that we do catch, and to be honest, that all comes under our own what is called a Section 111 catch, which as crew we can take home and eat as well. So it'd pretty much typically be what I was catching if I was out fishing and taking home to eat and putting a fish chowder or something like that myself. So we typically any bycatch, we've got to record it, but it pretty much sustains our family.
I think it's works very well. The research that I've seen in terms of putting the New Zealand management framework in context of others around New Zealand, around the world, would put us either number 4 or number 5 in the world for the best fisheries management frameworks, right? And that assessment includes things like the level of research effort to understand what levels of fish stocks there are, including the impacts from fishing, the actual harvest levels that are being targeted, the speed at which decisions can be taken, and the involvement of stakeholders within those decisions, right? Well, an improvement might be greater involvement of local communities, right? And some of the fisheries, I think, is one area. Although there's opportunities, of course, in terms of consultation and feedback, but not very active engagement with those local communities in terms of, in particular, the inshore fishery. I think the other improvement would probably be, if I was to say this, almost the depoliticizing of it a little bit, to break it down to more the science. And a good example of that, if I will use it, is a recent one. You might have heard of it, called the snapper 8 fishery. The fish stocks have increased greatly. Again, it's almost, I think, a good story of how the quota management system can work to rebuild fish stocks, because they've grown over the past 20 years from, I think, down from about 17% of their original biomass up to now 40% or 46% of their unfished biomass. So it's really rebuilt. And during that time, we've still been able to have, we haven't had to close it completely. There's still been recreational people out there catching fish. There's still been commercial operators out there catching fish, providing jobs and providing food. But when presented with 4 options of what to do with that fishery now, with all the best science in terms of the forecasts, there was a decision to take the least conservative one. It's a lost opportunity, not just for the commercial sector, but for the country in terms of economic production, right? These are a great resource that we have. If we look after it, we can actually build sustainable jobs and income for individuals who are working in those fisheries, as well as the country as a whole in terms of tax take and export revenues, right? So I see that those sort of decisions, I think there's other factors coming into the decisions beyond just the science, and I would probably prefer it to be kept to science and local community sort of inputs. Yeah.
I spent my life on the ocean out here, and I've seen so many industrial boats from New Zealand's big cities, Auckland and Tauranga, just absolutely pillaging our backyard, and none of the fish caught has any economic or social benefit, I believe, to little coastal towns like Tairua. So part of what we're doing, I think, is taking our power back as a community and going back to how things used to be done, which is small boats, getting small catches for the locals, and first and foremost looking after the locals' well-being, so putting good fresh quality food in their stomachs, which food is, fresh fish is one of the best things you can eat for a healthy diet. Making it accessible to them straight out of the ocean instead of it having to go to Auckland and then come back to Tairua. One of the key things is we need to take a good hard look at the quota management system, which is not serving local communities, it's not serving coastal communities, and it's not encouraging people into doing the things that we're doing. So it's very hard to access quota or ACE, annual catch entitlements. It's most of that, for example, for Snapper 1 is held by the big guys. So Sanfords, for example, hold 1 million kilos of snapper in Snapper 1 quota area. So taking things back to making quota just only accessible to the fisherman that is going out and catching it would make a huge difference in New Zealand. Also, another thing I think that would make a huge difference to fisheries management is giving small communities control and management of their local fisheries. So, say for example, Snapper 1 or Kingfish 1 is such a huge area, and it could be managed a lot more at a micro level. So a great example is as well as the scallop fishery, the collapse of the Coromandel scallop fishery. Locals were screaming out about this 2 or 3 years ago, but nothing was really done by the ministry until it was too late, and now it's closed for 2 years. We, as recreational fishermen or even small-scale commercial fishermen, I'm a firm believer we should be actually completely banning dredging, and commercial scallop fishermen should be getting with the times and actually hand-picking scallops by scuba or by freediving, and there'd be absolutely minimum damage to the bottom. It's just it's just a travesty that we're stuck in the way of doing things from 70 or 80 years ago when scallop dredges were first used in New Zealand, and we're stuck doing things in the old ways instead of looking at new innovative ways to catch them and put them on the plate. I think Coromandel scallops could go for a very good price on a plate in Auckland if people saw they were diver caught.
If anyone's going to know the first-hand effects that commercial fishing has on the marine area, it's Darrell, a dive instructor at Dive Zone Whitianga. He dives the marine area around Whitianga regularly. I went to ask him about his outlook on the fisheries of New Zealand and what differences he's seen in the marine environment due to commercial fishing.
In the barrens and stuff where a lot of the snapper are gone, so the fish are, I suppose, their whole environment's changing, and there's whole big areas now where there's quite a few kinner barrens and fish being taken out by some of the commercial fishing or even the cray stuff. It's the whole process, I believe, that the whole system. I know with the stuff at the moment with the scallops, but the dredge side of things, the beds have been quite decimated in that sense. So I've noticed that quite big. Obviously, with what's happened now with the rahui and everything, it is making it hard for us, in that sense, for the local recreational diver to go and get a feed, really. So I think the system really, really needs a big rethink,
Like, say you dive at a site, how many months do you think would take for just Canada to take over a certain dive site?
It's quite fast, actually, the whole process. Yeah, it's quite continual, but there's some areas you don't dive for a few months because of the different seasons and stuff. So you go back there from last summer to this summer, and it's quite drastically different. The whole area is just quite barren. A lot of the smaller, the smaller fish aren't there as well because the bigger fish. It's sort of the whole cycle, I suppose. Like the hand caught stuff, I reckon is the way to go, right? Line caught, and they're slowly getting more and more fish that they can get on a spear gun. So that's very sustainable and not have any bycatch or not have any bad stuff. System can go like that, and people can target smaller fish at. I know the price might go up a little bit, but it's going to be more environmentally, and it's going to be a better product at restaurants too, that sort of thing. So
for the scallops, instead of dredging, it would even create job opportunities in Whitianga if people could dive for them commercially instead of dredging.
Absolutely, they do it overseas for a lot of stuff. Yeah. They hook a dive, or they dive on surface supply stuff, or they dive on scuba. But it's definitely going to make the beds a lot better. I think a big part of it is the accuracy with the dredges now. They go up here and they turn around, and there's no leeway, right? They're very, very precise, and they just destroy the whole bed. Biggest thing there, I reckon, would be the banning of dredges and bottom, the stuff that's damaging the ocean. Like I know even out at Slipper Island where we've been, where it got really hard at some points here to find some of these things, and they just spread out, and if there's no biomass, it's just not going to be sustainable for our kids. Yeah, I think there's too many big players in the thing that are pushing out the little guys. And it's the little guys that'll make it work. The small one-man band operators that can have a little boat, go out and get the targeted fish, bring them back to the restaurant, and do all that sort of. We need to go backwards, I think, rather than the big corporate world. I found at one stage it was quite funny. There was no fresh fish at Salt because there was an accident on the Kopahiku. So all our fresh fish that comes off our wharf goes to Hamilton and then comes back on a truck. Boys have got too much money involved now, I believe, and it's very hard for a little operator, a family operator, to come in and set up. That's what I reckon is what we need, rather than just dragging up tons of it and then the price goes down and there's so much wastage. And there's some real cool spots, and we've got some beautiful areas here too, but there's more and more areas that are getting nailed by the big fisherman dudes, and their quotas get bigger, their boats get bigger, their accuracy gets better, and they just take everything. If there was available for wet fish at the wharf or that sort of, I reckon that's the way to go back into the small communities and really sustainable.
I went to talk to Mike Bhana to see what his outlook was on the sustainability of New Zealand's fisheries and any other information that he had to offer.
The problem we have in New Zealand is we have this quota management system, which was brought in about 30 years ago. And what it's done is it's allowed big corporations and big companies to take over, where if you go back 35 years ago, all our communities did have small artisanal fishermen who came in with their catches and you could buy fish off the wharf, etc. And there were these wonderful little communities of fishermen up and down our coast. When we changed that system, we effectively allowed money to come in and control how our fisheries are run and managed. And it's been a major problem for 30 years, and it's only got worse. What's happened is those small fishermen have been brought out, bigger companies all run with shareholders taking control of that, and what's left of the smaller fishermen fishing for these big companies and struggling to make a living. So the majority of them have gone. But it also means that those companies want to take the fish directly back to their fish processing areas, and so we don't get a lot of local fish coming onto the local markets. The interesting thing is that the fish are actually our fish, so they belong to New Zealand. It's what you call a common property resource. Now, when the QMS was introduced, it was this this strange neoliberal time in New Zealand politics where privatising everything was the way to go forward. And that's turned out to be a disaster in fisheries, because as soon as we gave property rights over the fish, the owners, lost control of how that fish or those stocks are managed. And while government had initially planned to have better control over managing that, that's been sort of whittled away by these big companies and the power of money and the power of lobbying. To become more sustainable, there's a bunch of things we need to do. Firstly, I really don't think that there's a place for the quota management system in our fisheries going forward. That's the problem. We need to get rid of corporations. Corporations shouldn't own the rights to our fish. The only person who should have the rights to fish are the fishermen themselves. And they should be paying us, the owners, a percentage of what they earn in the way of tax that comes back to us for that for fishing those fish that we all own. And we also need a better scientific management of those fish stocks, which is the other problem we have within the QMS, is that the science has been captured. And by that I mean that the scientists work for the commercial industry, they work for MPI, and they're not independent. So they're not assessing the fish and making decisions based on what is best for those fisheries going forward. It's all about money. And unfortunately, money and conservation don't mix. What we should have in a town like Tairua, in fact, every little town up and down the coast of New Zealand, is 3 or 4 fishermen who operate non-invasive methods, no bottom trawling or dredging. So they're hook and line fishermen. They bring back their catch each day. People can go to the wharf and buy it. So the restaurants can go and buy their fish straight off the boat. The locals can go buy their fish straight off the boat at a reasonable price, not the ridiculous prices we're paying currently. And then the rest of that fish, the fishermen can then sell into other markets. But we need to change the system to allow that to happen, because every community in New Zealand, or every coastal community in New Zealand, that part of our sort of social structure is missing now. We don't have fishermen, we don't have fishing companies. The only people who fish really are the recreational fishermen, and also the fishermen who are in the charter operations. So what we want to see is more small local fishing operators working in those communities again.
Through conducting these interviews, I found that while New Zealand's fisheries are world leading, they could be run much more sustainably. First and foremost, New Zealand needs to ban destructive and unsustainable methods such as bottom trawling and bottom dredging. These can be replaced with much more selective methods, such as commercial diving, which will provide an influx of job opportunities in areas such as Whitianga. Big trawling nets could also be replaced with more sustainable methods such as longline fishing with no more than 100 hooks on a line, as well as precision harvesting nets, which have big holes along the side, which mean that fish that are not of a certain size are set free. And fish also remain swimming until they meet the surface, which means they're going to be of a higher quality. The way the fisheries are run also needs to change. New Zealand's fisheries are currently overlooked by a large group called the Ministry for Primary Industries. Instead, local communities should have their own councils, which allows local fishermen to come directly to them and report what they are seeing out on the ocean. After all, it's coastal communities that are affected the most by the effects of commercial fishing, so they should have the first say. Coastal communities should be able to create direct change for their local community. New Zealand may have a world-leading quota management system that can rebuild fisheries, but why is it that fisheries such as Snapper 8 had to collapse in the first place? Every single person working under the jurisdiction of New Zealand's fisheries management systems has the opportunity to create change. Large fishing companies have the opportunity to change the system, giving coastal communities more control of New Zealand's fisheries by giving up some of their quota so that small businesses can be set up to supply locals sustainably and on a smaller scale. Yes, New Zealand still relies on the 96% of fish that we export, but if we could reduce that amount by selling higher quality fish to locals that would be willing to pay the extra price, this would be a much more sustainable alternative. The future of New Zealand's fisheries needs to be one that includes much more local coastal community run businesses, with wet fish sold at the wharf, and sustainable fishing methods used, there's a bright future for New Zealand's fisheries.